Mm. Yeah, we have an incredible woman. I call her the grand dame of the UFO ET world. But go ahead, Brendan, introduce our good friend.
Thank you, Alan. So, for everybody who is here with us, again, thank you so much for joining in for the Portal to Ascension conference. We're going to have a lot of fun here. And Barbara, thank you so much for joining us. This is a very, very engaging and exciting topic. I'll just introduce Barbara. And Barbara, do you want to just double check your microphone and say hello? And we'll just say hello to you as well. If you'd like to go ahead and unmute, go ahead and do that. And we'll just say hello. And then I'll do an introduction and we'll just chit chat for a bit. So, we'll just make sure that Barbara's audio is coming through. And all right, we'll get that figured out. So for those of you who are tuned in, and Barbara, jump in at any time, if you haven't heard of Barbara Lamb, so Barbara has been involved with the not only past life regression, but also the theme of ETs for quite some time. Barbara, are you there? Can we hear you now?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Wonderful. Barbara, thank you so much for
Yay.
joining us. So, well, I'm happy to be able to just kind of like chit chat, and what I'd love to even just do now is just kind of like hype things up for you, get people excited about what you're here to talk about, and that's coming from my own personal experience. Being an experiencer, it's exciting to be here talking to you, and so for everybody who is here, Barbara, over the years, she's been working with like thousands of experiencers, people who have had contact with UFOs and ETs, be it in this dimension or even in dream time. And Barbara has been helping people with past life regression. And within this, it leads into the theme of today's discussion. And the theme of today's discussion is, were you an ET in a past life? Or just the mere concept of are any of us, have we been ETs in a past life? And so this is a very interesting topic, and I love being able to explore the ET phenomenon. And Barbara has also been involved with researching crop circles over the years as well. And as Alan was saying, it's really like one of like the go-to experts within the field of ETs and extra dimensional beings and all sorts of things. So Barbara, again, I love for you just even just kind of like say hello and maybe tell us a bit about what we'll be talking about today. And I'll just chit chat here for a minute if that's, then we'll go from there. So.
Okay. Well, I just want to say, first of all, I'm just so honored to follow Foster Gamble.
Right.
I mean, the work that he's doing in the world is so excellent and so needed and inspiring. But now I'll turn my attention to what I'm talking about, having been extraterrestrials in past lives. So as you very nicely said, I'm a psychotherapist ever since 1976. I'm kind of in the old guard, and I've had lots of training in hypnosis and in regression therapy. In fact, I had 5 years of training as a past life regression therapist in the 1980s through the Association for Past Life Research and Therapies. And then so I did many, many years. I still continue to do regressions to people's past lives when people are interested in doing that, or when that seems to be the source of a current problem. Often we find that the source is in a previous lifetime and is carried over into this lifetime. But in 1991, people started coming to me to talk about their odd experiences of being visited in their rooms at night by strange beings, or having missing time experiences, or seeing a UFO and feeling like something happened there, which they don't remember. So anyway, I've done several thousand regressions since 1991 to people's experiences with extraterrestrials. That is, experiences in this life. Now, along the way, I have discovered, to my surprise, I must say, that many people have had experiences as an extraterrestrial in some of their past lives. And it all came into my attention totally by surprise. In the 1980s, I was just learning how to do regression therapy. And one of my ongoing therapy clients was very concerned because all of her life she had an anger problem. She would get angry and annoyed and blow up just, well, so much of the time. And even at work, and it was beginning to ruin her work relationships and ruin her personal relationships. So that was an issue she wanted to work on. So we did a regression to go back to the source of her anger, this ongoing, lifelong habit of erupting into anger. And in the regression, what we found is that she was what we would call an extraterrestrial being, a very drab being, sort of grayish, brownish being on a very drab, grayish, brownish planet. There was very little vegetation there, but it was all grayish, brownish. Everything was drab and dull, and the whole lifetime was drab and dull. So that soul who had had that experience of being a drab extraterrestrial, after dying, that soul decided to have a different kind of experience, to be a different kind of being, and experience something that the soul had heard of was called emotion, because there was no emotion, no variation of feeling at all in that drab life. So that soul chose to be on a different planet with different kinds of beings, and that meant planet Earth. And so the soul reincarnated as a human being. And that soul chose to be a female, and a very beautiful female. And when that beautiful female was, late in teenage years, she was chosen to be taken away and be part of a harem for the Sultan. So she became one of the Sultan's wives. And she was so beautiful, talented, lovely, enjoyable, that she became the favorite wife of that Sultan. So that was very nice for her and nice for the Sultan. But the other wives didn't like that at all. They were jealous, they were envious, and they took to dislike her. And they hassled her and harangued her, gave her a miserable time. And so she had a lot of emotion, so different than the previous lifetime as the drab extraterrestrial. So it became worse and worse, more and more enmity, more and more harassment, more and more anger, more and more frustration. And finally, the other wives killed her to get her out of the way so that maybe they could become the favorite wife of the Sultan. So that was a very unfortunate ending for that particular woman. And after that, her soul got stuck on the karmic wheel. Once she was a human being, she created karma like we all do. And then she was stuck on the karmic wheel and had to keep coming back into human lives. So that lifetime was a few hundred years ago. And here she is, still incarnated into this life. And shortly after that, I met a very wonderful lady from Chicago. And she was wondering why these three little white beings were coming into her room at night very often, sometimes even during the day. And she had the sense that they were taking her away somehow. She couldn't remember too many details of this, like most people can't when they're visited by extraterrestrials. But anyway, she wondered, why was it that these little beings were coming to her? So we did a regression, and we found that she was a long time ago, multi thousands of years ago, we would estimate that she was on a different planet, and her whole being was to be a blue spherical being, a spherical being of pure light and energy. No arms, no legs, no face as we know it, but very conscious, very aware, very alive. And all the other beings on that planet were the same. They were blue, sometimes purplish beings of light, spherically shaped, and lovely, lovely beings, very intelligent, very conscious, very aware. But those beings didn't have to eat the way we do. They didn't have to imbibe any kind of food or liquid because they were pure energy. So what they would do to refurbish themselves when their spherical shape began to sort of diminish into more of an oval shape, kind of like a balloon beginning to let out some of the air. And so when she felt diminished, she would go into a building that we would describe looking like a temple with columns. And in that building, there was only energy and light. So she would go in through the column, just float. All of these beings traveled around simply by floating, by thinking of where they wanted to go. And then their spherical bodies were floating in that direction. So she would float into the temple and just be there in this wonderful purplish blue energy. And as she was there, she would be expanding, filling up back into her true spherical shape, all refurbished, re-nourished, no food, just pure, wonderful energy. So it was a very nice lifetime, but some of her companions decided that they would like to find out about other kinds of lives on other planets. So she had a little meeting with some of these beings, and they stood around a round table that had kind of a magnifying glass, looking glass sort of glass feature in the middle. And that enabled them to look way out into space and to see other planets and to be able to bring them closer by magnification so that they could see some of the details of those planets. And in that process, they discovered planet Earth. And they realized that there was a lot of life of all kinds going on that Earth, and that life would be very, very different there than it was here on this purplish blue spherical being planets living on pure energy and being pure energy. So anyway, they put her into a spacecraft that they had and sent her off, and she had a long trip. Details of that trip came through in the regression. And then she landed on planet Earth. And during the travel on the spaceship, she was aware of feeling her whole spherical energy body changing, becoming more compact, more dense, more physical. That was a very unusual thing for her to experience. And by the time she arrived on planet Earth, she was a human being. Now, this also was a long, long time ago. So she had changed into being a primitive, early human being, what we might refer to casually as the caveman period of human life. So here she was on this planet with everything dense and physical, plants, trees, earth, dirt, other beings like her in primitive physical bodies, and they had to hunt their food or gather their food and often fight off other animals and threats to their existence. And it was a really difficult life, entirely different than what she had come from. And she continued to live out her whole life as one of these primitive human beings. And again, because she was here as a human being, she got caught up in the karmic pattern of life and therefore had to keep reincarnating even till now as a physical being coming to Earth. And then there was another counseling client I had in the 1980s. And again, this was before I even knew that there were such a thing as extraterrestrial beings. So all of these regressions I'm telling you about right now were a total surprise to me because I didn't know that sort of thing existed. But this particular woman was having difficulties currently with her male partner, enough difficulties to wonder whether or not she should marry him, even though he wanted to marry her. So we did a regression to figure out the basis, the source, the root of her having difficulties with this particular person. So in the regression, we went into a past life when she and her male partner were extraterrestrial beings. This was a surprise to her and a surprise to me. But there they were, coming to Earth in a fairly small spaceship and landing in a field here on Earth. And the field was outside of a town, and they were very curious about where they had landed and what this land was about. So they left their spaceship and walked a distance, a couple of miles or so, into the town. And these particular beings looked fairly human, a little bit different, although their clothing was quite different. So people in the town didn't know quite what to make of them and tended to, if anything, stay away from them. But they had a good look around. And then eventually they left the town and went back out across the field to their spaceship, went in, expecting to fly away. And the operation of the spaceship did not work. Something dysfunctional had happened. And so her male partner, extraterrestrial, who was the pilot of this little craft and the mechanic, he was the one who understood the workings of this craft. He tried to fix the craft and he couldn't. So a day went by, a night went by, and another day, and another day, and another day, and another night. And basically, he still failed to fix the craft so that they could fly away and go back to their own planet. To make a long story short, both of them died here, a rather miserable death because they didn't have any of the nourishment that they were accustomed to. And so they basically starved and died of thirst. So the main thing about that is that the resentment that the female had, my client had, toward that male partner got carried over from that lifetime into this lifetime. That she had that feeling of disgust and distrust and disappointment in him. And yet before that regression, she hadn't really understood why that was so. So then there was a woman who came. This was after I was actually beginning to do work with extraterrestrial experiencers. And this woman heard a lecture that I was giving about extraterrestrial experiences and approached me and said, I'm having a lot of those visits too, and I would like to work with you. So she came for several regressions. Each one was extremely interesting because she had been an extraterrestrial being in each of those lifetimes. She had been different types of extraterrestrial beings according to whichever lifetime we were revisiting in regression. So she started out as being reincarnated in a planet with the beings that were intelligent and interesting, and they were kind of limited in what they were understanding about intelligence and so forth. And so after she finished a lifetime on that planet, her soul decided to reincarnate on another planet that had extraterrestrial beings on it, and she would be one of those beings. So those extraterrestrial beings practiced telepathy as a regular way of communicating with each other and knowing things. And they explored various aspects of consciousness. So that was rewarding. And she had a couple of lifetimes on that planet as that kind of being. And then after finishing those lifetimes, her soul decided to reincarnate on still a different planet that would be very involved in consciousness aspects. So in other words, she as the soul was growing, evolving, developing with each incarnation. So on this particular planet, the beings were experimenting with group mind of all sharing their consciousness and having the same consciousness. The beings on that planet were just learning how to do that. That was new for them. But my client, as one of those beings, couldn't quite manage, couldn't quite agree to give up her own individual thoughts, her own individual mind. She didn't really want to be totally a group mind. That individual sense was too strong for her, too important for her. So she finished that lifetime. And then she went into being a being in other lifetimes, several lifetimes, of being an extraterrestrial being that were very involved, not so much in consciousness work, but in physical work, in doing physical healing. And so the last regression that we did was, here she was as a human being going into a past life, the most recent past life, as an extraterrestrial being involved in doing healing. And she realized that she had had a few lifetimes on that planet as that kind of being doing physical healings, mostly with other beings on that planet. But in this lifetime, in the last regression that we did, she went to that planet. That is, she was taken by those beings to that planet, and she found herself standing around a medical type table with the other beings from that planet. And temporarily, she was one of those beings, even though she was living her lifetime here as a human being. This brings up the whole subject of dual reality. I have met a number of people who've been human beings fully living here on Earth in this incarnation but sometimes they return to their original other lifetime extraterrestrial form for the period of that visitation and then come back to their physical form. So that was true of her. So here she was in this last regression that we did, standing around a table with the other beings and being one of those extraterrestrial beings. And they were actually doing healing work on an abducted human man in our contemporary times. This was in the 1990s. And so there they were working. She was perfecting her learning, her art of healing. And the thing that stood out to her in that regression is that the other beings were teaching her how to use what they called the energy code point for healing. So she brought that information, that technique back with her. And during the course of our working together, which went on for a year and a half or so, having regressions here and there, during that time, she actually left her corporate job. She had worked for one of the big corporations and was doing wonderfully in management and was rising up the chain of management. She had a wonderful job and a wonderful future ahead of her. But she left that job entirely and went to study healing. She went to New York City and studied healing, a whole long course with Barbara Brennan. And then she came back here to California and opened her own healing studio. And she is still, from the 1990s, still doing that healing work today in her studio. So it truly is her life calling. And she had learned some of those techniques from having been the extraterrestrial on that other planet during the healing work. And very recently, there was a woman who came for regression, and she knew that she was having many visits in this lifetime from Arcturian beings. These were beautiful, tall, blue-skinned beings who looked quite human, except that their head shapes were different, their eyes were much bigger, and they had this beautiful, almost luminous blue skin. And she really enjoyed her experiences with these blue Arcturian beings. So we had a regression together, and she learned that she had been one of those blue Arcturian beings during many, many lifetimes. And she found out that it was totally her soul choice to come and experience being a human being on planet Earth and to help out the human beings by letting them know about the Arcturian beings and letting them know about many other kinds of what we call extraterrestrial beings who live throughout the galaxies. So that she came with a mission. She also came to do some healing work and some consciousness raising work. So she found out that she would be an Arcturian again in her next life. If she could get off the wheel of karma by being a human in this life, she would be able to be an Arcturian again in the next life. And she really looked forward to that because these beings were very conscious, very loving, in fact, unconditionally loving. something that she didn't find very often here, living as a human on planet Earth. So several of my many counseling clients have come to find the details of their extraterrestrial encounters in this life. So I've done well over 4,000 regressions to people's extraterrestrial experiences. That is, people who are living here, like you and I are, and who occasionally are having these extraterrestrial encounters. And during this work with them, I've often found that they had been the form of the being who visits them now. They had been that form in previous lifetimes. And that's one of the reasons why they were having experiences with now that they are a human. In other words, those beings whom they used to be one of in previous lifetimes, those beings care about her. She's one of them, actually, by soul. And so they come and visit her, see how she's doing, and they'll even come and take her onto their ships for checkups, medical checkups. And if there's something wrong with her human body, they will heal it, usually with some form of light. Many of these extraterrestrial beings heal with light in various kinds of apparatus, or sometimes just with flooding them with pure white healing light. So many of these experiencers do have something healed and repaired by the extraterrestrials whom they used to be one of in previous lifetimes. And then sometimes if the person has something wrong with some part of their body, one of the systems or whatever, the beings will tell them that they have that problem. For instance, a problem with their liver that they may not have known about. And the beings will tell them to be sure to go to their doctor when they return to Earth and tell them to have their liver checked. And then that work can be carried out on Earth. So sometimes the healing is done by the beings in these trips to the spaceships, and sometimes healing is done of the person right there in the person's home. Usually when the person is asleep and made to be even more soundly unaware, and the healing goes on whatever part of their body needs the healing right there in their own home. So many of these beings who are humans now and who were extraterrestrial beings, they realize that every now and then they receive an important download of information from these beings. In other words, they might be just walking along or doing the dishes or making the bed or whatever, and suddenly it's like a whole packet of information comes into their mind, into their awareness. And it's always very interesting information. It's not just trivial stuff. It's information that they can really use, information that they wouldn't have had any other way. And sometimes these people receive from the beings whom they used to be in previous lives, they receive guidance from those beings. We all have spirit guides. And many people who were extraterrestrials in previous lives have extraterrestrial guides. So, in other words, they might be going around their life, or they might be sitting down and meditating, and they're getting new information coming into their mind, very often in the form of helpful guidance. And this is coming from those extraterrestrial beings who are visiting them in this lifetime and who that person was in a previous lifetime. So some of the species that have been coming to some of my clients, the most typical ones are, and these are the beings that the people used to be in previous lifetimes. So the most typical ones are the gray beings, and not just the little robotic-like gray beings we hear so much about, but mostly gray beings who are taller, somewhat taller, like 5'7" 5'8" tall, and they're gray, but they seem very alive, very cognizant, very intelligent, of course, very telepathic. And other beings that typically people have been and have visits with are Pleiadian beings. And there are a number of different types of Pleiadian beings because there are 7 major planets and some non-major planets also in the whole Pleiadian system. So there are different types of beings. And some are visited by and used to be Sirian beings, especially from Sirius B. Some of them have visits with Arcturian beings and were Arcturians. The same with Andromedans. They have Andromedan visits and were Andromedans. The same is true for mantis beings, very tall, wonderful beings, 8, 9, 10 feet tall, looking like a big praying mantis. These beings are very intelligent, very all-knowing, and often are described by my clients as unconditionally loving. So some of my clients used to be mantis beings themselves. And then some of my clients have been reptilian beings. They currently have visits from reptilian beings, and they used to be reptilian beings. Reptilian beings tend to have a pretty negative rap, as most of you have heard. But there are actually many different species of reptilian beings, and some of them are really decent, really what we would call nice, likable, workable with, very acceptable to us. So some of my people have been reptilians in previous lifetimes, and some have been tall, white Zeta beings. Again, wonderful, high consciousness, loving beings. And some have been Antarian beings. Those are the most common types that I have regressed people to having been in past lives. And then there's a whole category of people I have worked with, which we will call ET human hybrid beings. I've mentioned a lot of detail about these beings in my book, which I've written with Miguel Mendonça, wonderful man from England. The book is called Meet the Hybrids by Miguel Mendonça and Barbara Lamb. And so these are people who are living here on Earth, and they are ET human hybrids. They were carried by their mother in the womb, and they were born here on Earth the way that we all are born. And either before conception, an embryo was made from the mother's sperm, the mother's eggs, and the father's sperm, and combined with extraterrestrial DNA, making an embryo, and that embryo was planted into the human mother, usually without her awareness, when she sort of switched off out of consciousness. And then another method of creating the hybrid who lives on Earth is that when the mother is pregnant, usually about 6 or 7 months along in the pregnancy, she is taken by extraterrestrials, and they use a syringe and inject through the wall of her abdomen, the wall of the uterus, and into the growing fetus. And that fetus is hybridized and therefore is born as an ET human hybrid. So all of these hybrids have DNA from not only one extraterrestrial species, but 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 different extraterrestrial species. And these hybrids are wonderful people. They are here totally as ambassadors for the beings whose DNA they have. Ambassadors in the sense that they are doing the work here, that those beings are not able to do their work here. They're not able to come here, stay here, live here. And so they create the hybrids who are here doing the work with which these very enlightened beings would like to see done on Earth. It's all about raising the consciousness of humanity. So these hybrids are here serving, raising consciousness, healing people, doing telepathic work, doing telepathy, and communicating with animals. They're teaching, they're doing workshops, they're writing books, they're writing articles, all of that to raise the consciousness of humanity. We're very fortunate to have these people with us. And so these people, these hybrids, not only have extraterrestrial DNA, but in many cases, we have found out through regression that they had been those species of extraterrestrials in previous lifetimes. So some of them had found out that they had been mantis beings, or little gray beings, or medium-sized gray beings. Some of them had been tall white zetas, or Arcturians, or Andromedans, or reptilian beings, or dolphin-like beings living on a very watery planet, or Quabar beings. The Quabar being is a combination of different kinds of extraterrestrial beings, kind of like a group soul, a group being. Some used to be Syrian beings, some had been Anunnaki beings, some had been Lyrans, some had been Pygmalian beings, not very much heard of here. Some had been Zeta beings, some had been Camelopardian beings. Again, not very well heard of here. Also, we have with us on Earth walk-ins, which Sheila Seppi, a couple of hours ago, gave a wonderful lecture about. This is where a soul does a soul exchange with a person living here who really does not want to be here anymore. That person might be in her 30s, 40s, 50s, still having quite a bit of lifetime left as a human. And the soul of that person who doesn't want to be here anymore, they make an agreement, a soul agreement, that at a particular time and place, the old soul will leave the body as the incoming soul comes into and inhabits the body from then on. And this work, these walk-ins, always seem to come here for giving totally good service to humanity, raising the consciousness of humanity and giving good service in many, many ways. Some of the souls that come in as a walk-in come from the spiritual realm. And some souls who walk in come from the extraterrestrial realm. And so that's what I'm mostly focusing on at the moment, although I have worked with both kinds of walk-ins, those who came from the spiritual realm and those who came from the extraterrestrial realm. So those particularly fascinate me, the ones who were extraterrestrials and left that life and did the soul exchange with a human in order to be here and serve. So in some of these cases, the soul of that kind of walk-in now and then returns to their original spaceship and their companions that they came from when they did the walk-in experience. And experience maybe for a few hours being one of their original kind of beings again. It's really very interesting and very reassuring to those people. And some of these walk-ins living their life here on Earth, they are visited briefly by an extraterrestrial companion they used to have, or even an extraterrestrial relative whom they used to be with on the spaceship. And one man I worked with who is a walk-in, sometimes every now and then, maybe every several months, return to his extraterrestrial ship and briefly, for a few hours, to his life as the captain, extraterrestrial captain of that ship. He would actually experience being morphed or changed back into his original extraterrestrial form for a few hours, and maybe flying the ship or maybe just discussing things with his companions on the ship. Now, these experiences would usually happen during the night. And another man, another woman who was a walk-in sometimes returned to her ET ship and would actually fly the ship for a few hours and then come back, wake up the next morning in bed, not even knowing they had had that experience, or maybe having a vague sense of it. So I'm thinking that our time is coming to a close.
Barbara, thank you so
I want
much.
to mention quickly,
Go ahead.
I just very quickly want to mention one of the hybrid women, Jacqueline Smith, is available to give readings, psychic readings, about your lineage of various kinds of extraterrestrials that you may have been in your past life. Her email is jacquelinesmith@jacquelinesmith.com. So that's one way to find out if you were an extraterrestrial in previous lives, and if so, what kind of extraterrestrials have you been? Anyway, to wrap this all up, all of the hybrids I have worked with and some of the walk-ins have this wonderful understanding, which I'd like to pass along to you. And that is that we are all one. Not only we humans are all one, but we humans and all the beings in creation, in the cosmos, are all one. And we are all from the great creative source. Thank you very much.
Barbara, thank you so much. It's fascinating being able to hear you share from all the wisdom you hold. And again, I think this is one of those topics that for many people, just to be able to hear your confidence and sharing from your experiences and meeting all these people over the years, it really just helps us begin to feel into that idea of like, okay, like these races, they exist. This is an experience. And then how much more there is still for us to explore and learn. So Barbara, thank you again so much for joining us here today and for sharing from your.
Very welcome. My pleasure.
Beautiful. Thank you. So with that said, we are at the point where I think we're ready to transition. And Michelle, is that cool with you? I'll pass it over to you. Barbara, was there anything else you wanted to mention real quick before we wrap it up?
Just my website, if anybody wants to find out more, is Barbara Lamb Regressions.com. Barbara Lamb Regressions.com.
And Barbara, do you do your regressions in person, online? How do you do your regressions?
Well, I mostly was doing them in person, although people started coming from all over the world, and I adapted to doing Zoom regressions or Skype or even FaceTime. And then, of course, when COVID came in, many people, of course, didn't want to come in person, nor did I. We continued many of those regressions on Zoom or Skype or FaceTime, and I'm still finding that that's a wonderful way. They work remarkably well, almost like being in person.
That I feel that from just being on the Portal to Ascension conferences, that we all, we're not hugging each other in real time, but I feel our hearts are doing something, interacting with each other, just in seeing face to face and hearing each other's voices. It is very heart opening to be here in this space with all these people merging. And I just wanted to say, Barbara, I've loved you from the minute I met you. And I thank you for the work that you're doing with everyone. And each one of those stories, as I was sitting here listening, I could feel what was happening in my body, because every story has a code in it. And if we're dealing with something personally, it activates a knowing within each one of us that maybe we're relating to someone else's story, and gives us the impetus to want to go forward on our own personal soul evolutionary journey through hearing these stories, because we all have our own, right? And Brendan, I think you said that in the beginning when we first got on. So I really appreciate it. And thank you for being with us and a part of this family, and just love what you do.
Thank you, Michelle. And it's lovely to see you again.
Same here.
And Joan seemed like she was bursting with excitement. So I want to give her a moment here. Joan, if you want to come on and just share the excitement that I could see in your face.
Okay. You know, I never talked about my smile, so now I'm here to smile. Barbara, the fact is you're confirming through your hypnosis the presence of the extraterrestrials and our hybrid selves and our past life, present life, future lives all in one breath. And so I get very excited. I just get very, very excited, and I'm really appreciative. And you're so solid. I think the thing I appreciate the most is that you're so solid. And you're so grounded, and you've done this year after year. You have so much evidence and research, and keep going. You're an icon.
Thank you. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
I appreciate what you're doing too.
Well, just happy you bring this to the world. We need that. We need the confidence of it. We need to know we can bring that into our memory, and then to shift some of that karma and do what we came here to do. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Joan. Honestly, I'd be okay with just listening to you guys just talk about everything all day around here. So, and Barbara, thank you again for being here. I assume Michelle, we're probably about ready to bring on we have a special performance coming up from Kiyoshi, if I'm not mistaken. Or sorry, it might not. It's not. Is it a performance? Might be mistaken there, but
we're gonna find out. I'm looking for him in the Zoom room, and I don't see him yet. So
he's in right now.
He's here.
Thank you, Barbara. Love you so much.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you,
Barbara.